Howdy folks, Troy with V-Twins the V8s coming back on with another little project. You may remember this truck. This truck we did a lot of work on, and we installed the Holley Sniper fuel injection system on this. This has got a small block Ford 302, gently massaged with the Edelbrock Performer RPM package, and it has a ProCharger supercharger, belt-driven supercharger on it. And this truck just goes like crazy. It works really, really good. But it had like an old C4 transmission in it, and it's got a good sturdy 9-inch Ford rear end. So needless to say, that stock C4 had a relatively short lifespan once we woke up this 302. So it's always about the stories later on down the line. So the story is this truck had an encounter with a Tesla, and they were lined up and ready to rock and roll, and they went for it, and the Tesla hooked up and took off. The truck spun a couple of gears and then finally hooked up and passed the Tesla, but at the high end the transmission basically hand grenaded. So you got no forward speeds at all we have is park, and truck still runs great. No damage underneath, no damage to the vehicle. It's a complete internal failure with that C4. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a brand new TCI prepped C4 in here, along with the flywheel, breakaway stall converter, and a new transmission cooler, along with a new Lokar shifter with the proper neutral safety switch and such, so we don't have any starting in gear, which seemed to be a problem. This has a neutral safety switch, but it's like a micro switch, and the shifter is a little wanky, so if it's not just in the right position, either it doesn't start or it will start in gear. So we need to remedy that before somebody gets hurt. So without further ado, I'll bring the camera over, I'll show you what we have for components, and we'll start on the project. So let's get at it. Okay, so this is what we got here from components. We've got the TCI C4. It's all brand new, dyno tested, ready to rock and roll. We've got a breakaway torque converter. We've got a flex plate for the 302, and we have a new transmission cooler. Okay, and we have our truck up on the lift, and we are going to remove this transmission you see here. So I'm going to get right at it. You know, pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to pull the headers, the drive shaft, all of the components that are attached to the transmission, like the speedometer cable and the shifter, and we'll have to unbolt, obviously, the starter, the flex plate, and get this engine supported, and get the transmission jack under here and drop this baby out. So that's what we are going to work on today. Alright, so we're back here on my transmission project. Just wanted to give you a little update. Well, first we started with disconnecting the battery. That's number one. And then I removed the headers, the exhaust, the starter, all of the connections that go to the transmission. I will take the small camera and I'll show you where I'm at. I'm not completely done, just giving you an update. You can see I've got the exhaust off of it. Over here on this side, I've disconnected my oxygen sensor. I've disconnected my starter wire. My starter's out. I've got most of my connections on my transmission disconnected. I got the modulator, the vacuum is off on that side. I have my kickdown and shift linkage off on this side. I have my speedometer is out off over here. And really what I have left is I have the two transmission lines. I've got to turn the flywheel, take all of these bolts off so that when I pull this, I get the converter will come with the bell housing, and then the flywheel will stay on the engine. I'll get into that. I'll show you that, how that works when it happens. And of course, I have this cross member I've got to take out. The drive shaft I'm saving because they're usually going to have some leakage come out of here, and I figured if I leave it in right to the end, then we'll worry about it then. But yeah, cross member, transmission lines, converter bolts and Bellhousing bolts, and she'll be ready to go. So here we go. I got all my lines off. I've got all my Bellhousing bolts out all the way around. I removed my cross member, and I've tilted this engine down, but yet supported it with this jack that I have here, so that I can, once I pop this transmission off here, my engine isn't just hanging. So I'm going to turn this just a little bit, just so I've got some tension on it, like that. And I know my jack is supporting my engine. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to wiggle this off of the mounts, and then I'll have this transmission slid right out. We're out. There's my flywheel up here. I'm going to have to change. The transmission is on the jack. I pulled the converter out, let it drain a little bit. I have to take these bolts here out, take this Bellhousing off of here, much like a standard transmission, goes on to my new transmission, and then I also have to transfer the dipstick itself. So we're going to get to work on that. So we got our transmission out of the way. I took the Bellhousing off it. I got rid of the old transmission converter outside. Got a little bit of spillage, but it's kind of like part of the deal. I mean, I don't really have a lot of a mess, but I have a little bit. I buzzed the bolts out of the flywheel. I'm going to knock this flywheel off. Here's our flywheel. I'm replacing it just because it seems prudent. There's a little bit of wear on the ring gear, and might as well start off with a nice fresh piece. I got this inspection plate here. I figured I'll take that off, clean it, paint it, paint the Bellhousing, and so everything will be nice and clean and fresh going back together. So I'm going to work on that. Okay, folks, so I'm back here on the transmission project for the 51 Ford. We've got our TCI transmission here, and I have the Bellhousing that I removed from the original transmission. I went ahead, sandblasted that. I cleaned up all the mounting flanges so it should go on nicely. What else I've done is there's an inspection plate that goes in between the Bellhousing and the engine. I've cleaned that, painted that as well. I have a brand new flywheel that goes on there. So the next thing what we're going to want to do is we're going to get our inspection plate up mounted to the block. We'll install our flex plate, and then we'll be ready to install the transmission. So I cleaned this area here with a scuff pad just to make sure I don't have any debris on there, and my pieces go on nicely. I've got my freshly painted piece, and I'm going to drop it on these dowels, and I'm going to press it on there. It should go on there nice and flush and even, which in fact it does. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my flywheel here. Is going to be installed on here. It can only go on one way. So once all your bolts line up, that's exactly where it goes. I'm going to put a little Loctite on these bolts. We're going to snug them up, and then I'm going to torque them. Okay, so one of the things I did want to do is I took my old flywheel and I matched it to my new flywheel to make sure all the bolts are in the right spot. Then I got my new TCI torque converter you see right here, and I made sure that my flywheel was going to fit my torque converter. Now, on the original torque converter, there is a drain hole where you can drain fluid out of the torque converter. With this converter, I don't have that situation. The other thing is, with this new torque converter, it comes with these bigger bolts, and the holes in the flywheel are larger than the original holes. If you're going to use the original one, you got to drill it out. I'm not. I'm using the TCI flywheel that you see here. There's the part number. So I am good to go. The only other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that this little button fits in the back of my crankshaft before I get too much further along. My flywheel is on here where it's supposed to be. I know it's in the right spot because I can put all my bolts in hand tight. So I just wanted to double check that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these bolts out. I'm going to put a drop of Loctite on them. Then I'm going to zip them down lightly with the air gun, and then I'm going to torque all of these bolts in a crisscross pattern at 80 foot-pounds of torque. The specs are 75 to 85, so the mean is 80, so that's what we're going to torque it at. So I've done this, I've torqued this. What I did was I put a couple of bolts here so that I could hold the engine. So I created this like kind of situation where I can hold the engine and use my torque wrench without the engine turning, and you can see I make this crisscrossing pattern and just walk my way right around. All of my bolts are being torqued at spec, and the Loctite is on there, so we're good to go there. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to put my studs into my torque converter here. So I'm going to use the same principle I did before. Is I'm going to put a little Loctite on my bolts and thread them in here. And this has got an Allen slot in one side of it. I'm just going to turn it until it gets flush, and then I'm going to repeat this process all the way around so that it will hold this stud in place. The thing that's nice about this Allen being right here on the end is at a later date, if I want to take these nuts off, I got to take the transmission back out, and let's say I turn the nut and then this stud wants to turn, I can just put this Allen wrench in this end of this stud and hold it while I use, like, say, an open-ended wrench to get the nut loose. All right, so we're all set there. So in theory, this would be facing our transmission. Here's our bolts, and bada bing, they're on. Now you got to remember, this one here is the original Ford one. The holes really aren't bored out like they should be, but it should go right on. What I will be doing is taking this and bringing it over to the truck and make sure that that's going to slide right on there. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and do that right now. So let's take our converter and make sure it's going to mate right up over here without any problems. Look at that. Like a glove. All right, so now I know when this is in my transmission and I slide this on, it's just going to slip right on here, no problem, and it's located. Okay, so now that we have our inspection plate and our flywheel is mounted to the engine, our converter the studs are installed, we prepped it, we made sure it fits the flywheel and everything's going to be fine there. The next thing we want to do is we want to do some stuff to our transmission. We're going to install the rear transmission mount, and we're going to install our bell housing to the front. What we have to understand is these bolts that go around the front here hold this front pump into the transmission case. So we want to make sure when we get the transmission, obviously it's already been set in and snugged down, but we got to take out a couple of bolts so that we can put this bell housing on there. So I did that, and then I got my bell housing on here, and I put all my bolts in, and I snugged them down nice and evenly until my bell housing is kind of against my transmission. Then I torqued all of these bolts in a crisscross pattern using my torque wrench with a setting of 35 foot-pounds of torque. I just walked around it from side to side, crisscross, torquing all of these so that this is seated down and the pressure is even, so that this pump is seated and I don't have a ton of pressure on any side and it's flush. So now that I've got that done, I've got my transmission mounted in the back. And what else I did, you can't really see it, but I covered, it's got a chrome transmission pan on it. I covered that with some duct tape, so that while I'm having it on the transmission jack and I'm putting it in and moving it around, I don't really mess up the chrome on the pan. Thereafter we're all said and done, I can just peel that off, wash off whatever glue residue is on there, and it'll still look good. So at this point, basically this transmission's ready to go in there, and I'm going to start fiddling around with this shifter setup that we got and see if I can kind of figure that out. Okay folks, so I've got the American shifter, which is very similar to the Lokar shifter, kind of worked out on this transmission. And the thing that's weird is my client had purchased this shifter a long time ago. So he had it in a box. It's actually for a C6. I looked at it and I said, you know what, I got the instructions offline, I looked at how it was configured, I looked at this transmission, and I said, you know what, instead of buying another bracket set, I can basically take and do some modifications to these brackets and make this shifter work on this transmission. So this is what we have. I'm going to bring the small camera over and give you a really detailed look at it, but basically what it comes down to is you got a main bracket that goes across the top, and then you've got two side brackets, and then you've got brackets that mount on the tail shaft here that support this center piece. Once you have that, then you have your shifter mounted here with an arm. You place your arm on over here, and then you've got your linkage with a couple of Heim joints. It's a very, very simple system, but I really like it. And it has positive, dentants, so you're locked in park. You know what I mean? It's just like a factory shifter. You're not going to knock it into park. You're not going to knock it out of gear. You're not going to whack it into reverse or any of that type of stuff. So it's much better than what we had before. So let me give you a close-up. Okay, so here we are. So the main part of this is this bracket that goes down the center. And if you can see, I actually cut a piece off of this. I cut this piece off of this because I didn't need this, and this was going to interfere with my floor. So I got rid of that, and it shortened it up, and it cleaned it up. So you got this main bracket here, you got a side bracket that bolts to the main bracket and then bolts to the side of the transmission. You can see where I trimmed it here and here to mount on the side of the transmission, because this was designed for a C6, but as you can see, I mean, this is a nice clean mount. I'll clean up my edges here and everything, and this will be good to go over here. And then over here on this side, this bracket here, all I really had to do was drill a hole and kind of shorten the end of this here, and then these bolt here. This supports the front. In the back, you get these two little brackets here that bolt to the tail shaft bolts, tail shaft housing bolts that come up, and then two L brackets that come up and bolt to the back of this main brace. So that's the, basically it secures it in 4 locations. You got these, this, and this. So it makes it nice and stable. And then you have the shifter itself. So the shifter itself bolts on here, on both sides. And then it's got an adjustment here so you can tilt the shifter back and forth so that you have the proper feel inside the vehicle. You can also take this. I've positioned it here because it works for our truck, but you can move this to any of these slots. So it could be forward, it could be backward, it can be wherever you want. This just happens to be where it works for my truck. And the way that this works is kind of funky. Is up here on the top is you've got this thing, it looks like a cable, but that's where the button is, and that pushes down on this piece here and releases the shifter. So if you want to take it out of park, you push the button up here on the top, and then you can take it out of park, and then, move it to neutral or whatever need be. Over here, we're in park now. I made myself a little note on here so I knew which way park was. And you position this arm where you want it to be. I kind of made it so this arm is like up and down when it's in park, and this is like this when it's in park. So I had this nice straight shot. And then once you get it there, you measure your rod from hole. You measure from hole to hole, and then you subtract 1.5 inches. The 1.5 inches represents these heim joints. And then you could bolt it together, and it should fall right on where it's supposed to be. And I do have to say, I like this. You know, I got it adjusted, and it shifts. I have all my gears and everything. And now, really what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of clean up some of these edges. I'm going to tighten all my bolts down. And basically, this thing is ready to go. The other thing that's nice is it has this built-in neutral safety switch here. And by loosening these bolts and adjusting just this side of the shifter, you're adjusting where the neutral safety switch is in relationship to where the shifter is. So let's say you're in park, but you haven't tripped your neutral safety switch. You can either move this backwards or forwards to adjust it to get where you want it. Once park is adjusted, neutral just falls into place because of the way the slots are cut in on the side of the shifter. Over here on this side here, really, when you loosen these bolts here, basically that's to tilt your shifter back and forth. You can move this side here independently from this side. This side moves the shifter, this side adjusts the neutral safety switch. And I've been working on trying to get the this aftermarket shifter to mount on the transmission and to work, and then figure out where it's going to be coming through the floor. Then I needed to position my shifter back and forth. Now I've got it where it's supposed to be, I've got it functioning, everything looks good, but now I have to make a hole in the floor, and I have an inspection plate that lays on the floor, and it's got like a bazillion holes in it from every guy that's put a shifter or an emergency brake or the original and everything. So I've got to figure it out, make my hole, and then patch all the other holes. So I'm going to show you what I got going on. Okay, so what I did was I just bolted my transmission into place, and I've got my shifter up here. I got it where I want it to be. I've got my linkage all made and adjusted. The shifter functions. I have all my gears and everything. But now, as you can see, I have this big hole in the floor, and then I've got a plate that's going to drop down over it. So this is that inspection plate. This right here is originally where the factory shifter was. This is where somebody put an aftermarket automatic shifter in. And then this is where the emergency brake is. So what I've got to do is I've got it all measured out and mapped out. My shifter is going to be somewhere here in the middle, and then I'm going to have to patch all these holes and figure out where I'm going to relocate my emergency brake to, or if I can leave it in that location. So we're going to figure it out now. All right, so I took and I covered my piece with this masking tape, and then I made my appropriate measurements for my hole size. So I'm going to cut this out, and this should drop right over my shifter. So here we are inside the truck. Hopefully you can see this. This is my floor pan. Here's my shifter that I have installed in here, and you can see how it drops right through, and it's pretty darn good. I mean, I wanted to have plenty of room around the shifter because the shifter is not attached to the floor. It's attached to the transmission, and with the mounts on the rubber motor mounts and the rubber transmission mount, this is probably going to move a little bit. I'm going to make a little bit of a notch here so that my wires for my neutral safety switch won't make any contact with this floor pan. So I'm going to notch that out there. Other than that, that looks pretty damn good. I'm going to pop this out, make a trim, and then after that it's going to be patching the other holes and figuring out what's going to happen with its e-brake. Okay, so I dollied out my panel, got my hole cut. I got these scrap pieces of metal that I had to cover up these holes. I'm going to set that one there, this one here. Once I get this welded, then I can drop this in and figure out, I think my emergency brake's going to go over here, because that's like away from my problem areas where my shifter's going to be, my travel here. So it's going to be over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this over to the other bay. I'll grind this. I'll bring the MIG welder in. I'll tack all these pieces in, and that'll take care of that. Then we'll refit it. Okay, so here's my mock-up here. I got all my patches in, my piece fits perfect. I've mapped out where I'm putting my emergency brake, so it's in a good location. The previous location was over here, and obviously with this shifter, that's not going to work. So I set this out, and then I went underneath and made my measurements to make sure everything was clear and it looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and drill some holes and make some cuts, and we'll get this fitted in. Okay, so now I got all my patches welded in, and I ground everything down. I put a little patch over here because I had a spot on the floor where it was a little Swiss cheesy, so I took care of that at the same time. All my holes are welded up. I figured out my emergency brake and where I'm going to mount it. It mounts right here. It all works out underneath. I got it all set up underneath there. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and get this whole thing all sanded down, and I'm going to get it primed. I'm not going to worry about doing any body work to this because I'll probably lay some Dynamat over the top of this, and then of course we have the carpet that goes over the top of that. So I will get at that, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so now that I have my location for my shifter all figured out, my shifter itself is all figured out, and I've cut the hole in the floor where the shifter needs to go, patched all my other holes, got my emergency brake dialed in. Basically at this point, I am ready to complete the transmission install. So really all I have to do is take my transmission that I propped up there and slide it off the dowels, and we'll get to installing the converter and putting the transmission in the vehicle. So let's get at it. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to work on getting this in the vehicle. And really, there's only a couple of things I have to worry about. One of them is I need to put my converter in. And to put my converter in, I'm going to need to fill it with fluid. They recommend at least a quart, so we'll put at least a quart in there. We'll get our converter on, and we'll make sure it's all the way in. So let's get at it. Okay, so here's my TCI converter. I'm going to remove this top right here. They put like this Cosmoline type grease to lubricate the seal. That's good. What I've got is a quart of B&M's Trick Shift, and we're going to dump that right in this converter. All right, so now we've got our quart of transmission fluid in here. Now, I'm going to move it around a little bit to try and get the fluid to settle down in there as much as possible, because I got to pick it up and put it on the transmission and try not to spill that much out of it, or spill any out of it, really. Okay, so in preparation for putting our converter in, I'm going to have to put some pressure and turn it to get it to sit in to the pump. So on my transmission jack, I have this little chain that goes over the top that will hold the transmission down against my jack and support it, so if I put pressure on it, it's not going to move around. So we're going to take our converter and we are going to put it into this transmission. I'm going to try and do it quickly and turn it so we can get this to sit in here like it needs to. It's going to make the front of the transmission heavy. All right. So you'll feel it, like it went into the first gear, and then I turned it, and then it fell back in. And you can tell, they give you a measurement from the flange of the Bellhousing to the converter, how far it has to be. I can just go like this, and I can feel that that thing is all the way in there. And we can take a measurement and make sure. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make this measurement between this mating surface here and the face of the flywheel. So what I've got is I've got my inspection plate is tight against my engine, and my flywheel is on and torqued. I've got this dial indicator, and when you open this dial indicator up, what happens is this little end sticks out of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in this hole. The hole represents where the converter mounts. And when my little thing there makes contact on this end, that's where the plate is. So that's how I measure that distance. So I can go like that. So I can go like this, put this thing on here, you know, measure it like this. and I know that's going to be my distance. Then I can come over here and put this here and say, okay, here's my converter, here's my bell housing, this is the relationship that's going on at the engine. So you can see we're a ways away from that, so it's perfect. If this distance was, in other words, if I measured this and I was, say, like this, way back here, I would know that either my converter isn't all the way in, or I have some type of problem with my flywheel or something, because what's going to happen is you're not going to have enough room for the converter. You're going to try and put this transmission onto the back of the engine, and it's going to hit the converter and it's going to stop. So what we've done by doing this measurement is we've alleviated any problems. We know we don't have a problem, and this should go right together. Okay, so you can look at my flywheel. I got my bolt hole is at 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. That's where my converter bolt is going to go right in there. I got dowel pins here that my transmission goes to, and then I've got my bolts that hold my transmission on. I'll get the transmission under here, and we'll get it ready to bolt up. One other thing we have to consider is one of the bolts on the transmission holds this dipstick tube that I have here. So what happens is this dipstick tube goes in a hole over here, and then a bolt up here holds it in place. It has an O-ring on the end of it. I am not going to want to wiggle this transmission around with a shifter on it and with this dipstick on it right away. So I'm going to leave this off, and I'm going to leave this plug, if you can see it, in there so no debris gets in my transmission. Once I have my transmission mounted, then I will go at this and get this dipstick in. I got my jack and my transmission positioned under here. I'm gonna take and work on getting my transmission up into its location using my handy dandy transmission jack like this. We'll just have to slide it forward and get it mated in. If you've ever had one of these transmission jacks, I've dreamed of owning one of these for years. As you can see, we're starting to get to where we want to be, but I noticed my transmission is not really on the same angle as my engine. So with a quick turn of the knob, and up we go. Alright, we're just about there. Okay, so as you can see, my transmission is mated to my engine. Everything looks good. We're all bolted up flush. Now, one of the things you want to make sure is when you're sliding this onto the dowel, make sure that you get the transmission and the engine mated before you tighten up these bolts. I mean, you may have to start a bolt just to make sure the transmission doesn't turn, but don't tighten the transmission onto the engine with the bolts. Let it slide on. That's a good way of knowing that you're in the right spot. Mine slid right on. Now I got them all tightened up. Now I'm going to work on bolting the converter to the flywheel or the flex plate, whatever you want to call it. But we want to make sure that there's no binding. So I don't know if you can see this here. This is where my bolt hole is lined up. This is my starter hole. I can take and turn my converter with no problem at all. So I know it's freewheeling. It's not binding it against the flywheel. It's not binding in the crankshaft where the button on the end of the converter goes into the crankshaft. It's not binding in the transmission. It's nice and freewheeling. So now I'm going to put my studs in, and I'm going to rotate it, get all 4 studs in. Then I will put my 4 bolts on and get them torqued down. Okay, so we've got all of our converter bolts on. I tightened them in a crisscross pattern, and that's good to go. Now what we got over here, obviously, is we're missing a starter. We're going to bolt that starter in, get that wired up, and keep moving forward. Now, what I have over here is this bolt isn't in because I got to have this transmission tube with this O-ring is going to go up into here like this. And on the back side over here, where you can't see where I showed you earlier, is where the transmission tube goes in. This O-ring seals it, and then we put a bolt through the bell housing, and it's going to hold this transmission dipstick right here. I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so now my dipstick is in the transmission and it's up here and it's bolted. It's ready to go. Got my transmission mount is tight. This is where my cross member goes. I'm going to bring the cross member up, put these 2 bolts in here, my bolts on the side. Then my transmission is mounted. I can get this jack out of here and work on connecting it. Okay, so here's our transmission. It's all bolted up. We got our dipstick tubes in, our cross members all bolted, and I'm going to drop this jack out of here, and then we can work on connecting all of our accessories. Okay, so now I'm going to connect my kickdown linkage here, my TV cable, so to speak, and they give you an oil seal that goes on the end of this shaft where this piece connects to it. It pivots, and you don't want to have a leak there, so there's a small seal that they give you. You put that right in there. Then you can put your nut on and snug it up. Doesn't have to be crazy tight. And from there, the only thing we have to really worry about afterwards is adjusting this, but we can't really adjust it until we're kind of all done. Basically, it works off of the throttle, and I know that it's pretty close being right here because I already had this set up. So here's the part that holds it, and then if you come over here on this side, you can adjust it right here with this little screw. So we'll work on adjusting that later on. Now I'm going to put my speedometer cable in here, but I got an O-ring on here I want to replace so I don't have any leakage, and then that'll go right in there, and that'll pretty much take care of this side of the transmission. So I replaced the O-ring on the end of the speedo drive. I've slid it in here. It's seated down on the housing, and I've got this little bracket that just comes, bolts on, and it just squeezes this flush up against the transmission housing to create a seal. So get that on there, get that all set. Now our speedo drive should be all set. And then over here on this side, we're going to work on putting some transmission lines on. Okay, so here is the fitting where my line goes on, and here's the fitting where my other line goes on. This is one of my lines here. Sorry, I got it kind of pushed up out of the way. That's going to go on right there. My other one is right here, and it's going to go on right here. All right, so I'm going to screw these things on. Okay, so now I've got my transmission lines both on here like they should be. I ran my modulator line down, I anchored it here, and I got a rubber hose that comes over here and it goes to my modulator. This is all brand new stuff that I just put on, so I just want to make sure that everything is anchored down and nothing is chafing on anything else. All right, so now we got our starter all in over here, and we're looking pretty complete here. I mean, as far as the transmission goes, everything is all set with the transmission. Obviously, we got a lot of other things to work on. I got my floor piece I got to finish off and get that in there. I got a drive shaft that I got to put on, and I got some headers and a whole exhaust system that has to go on under here. And of course, we've got our cooling lines come up here, run along the frame and stop over here, and we got to rig up a cooler. So that'll be next on the agenda, I guess. Okay, so here's my underhood setup. You can see the supercharger's over there, the radiator's here. There's no way you're running a fan on the inside. I took my transmission cooler and I mounted it here so the fan will blow through the radiator and through this transmission cooler. It's the only place I had any room because down here I've got this intercooler, the electric fan mounts here. I just have no other place to put it, so there it is there. So it runs down to my lines, my lines run down along the frame and to the rest of my transmission steel lines that go back to the transmission. Okay, so the next phase of our operation is going to be putting the exhaust back on the truck, the headers. As you can see, my headers look a lot better now than they did when I took them off. That's because I sandblasted these headers, and I used the, believe it or not, the VHT header coating system. So I sandblasted them. I cleaned them with a cleaner they give you. It's basically like a solvent-based pre-cleaner. Sprayed them down with that. Then I applied a VHT high temp primer, and then I went with this silver finish here. So I think the headers look pretty good with the VHT system. I'll put some links below for the 3-component system that gives you these results, and you'll be able to purchase that through one of my links and help me out. You'll notice that I am wearing gloves while I handle these headers. The reason I'm doing that is because the oils from my skin transfer onto this surface, and then when you start the engine and it heats up, it'll burn your fingerprints right into it, and you will forever be able to see your palm prints, all your hand prints, all your paw prints all over it. So I recommend wearing a pair of gloves when you do this. It'll keep the headers nice and clean as well, so gloves are key. So I've got these all set, and what we're going to do is we're going to put them on the vehicle. I have new gaskets. They drop on slots, so really all I have to put in is the front and rear bolts, and then I can drop my gaskets in and put my other bolts on, so we're going to get at it. Okay, so I've worked on getting my headers, my headers into position, get my header bolts in, I drop my gaskets on, put the rest of my header bolts in and got them tight. I can bring the small camera over, I'll show you what we got. Next thing I'm going to want to do is put my oil dipstick tube in, and then my spark plugs and my wires. Okay, so now we got our dipstick all in. Now we can put our spark plugs in on both sides and get our wires back on, and we'll be pretty much done with the top. Okay, so now we've got all of the plugs in, all the wires on this right bank. Then we come around over here, and then the driver's side with the left bank, we've got all our plug wires on and plugs in and everything here. So at this point, pretty much everything on the top is done. Now we can go underneath and put our exhaust on. Okay, so now that we have everything done upstairs on our truck, now we're going to work on the downstairs. There's really not much left at all. Pretty much it's the exhaust system and the drive shaft. I'll bring the other camera and I'll show you what the underneath looks like. In the meantime, what I have done to prepare my exhaust is I've cleaned my flanges where my header gaskets go on, made sure my header gasket flanges were clean, have my bolts out, my gaskets out, so I can snake this up in there. As you can see, it's a really short exhaust. It comes off of the header, goes into the muffler, and then exits right in front of the wheel, and you can put this on or take it off as one piece, which is pretty sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing set up and get it on the truck. Okay, so I got my exhaust up under here. You can see it's a little forward, a little rearward rather, but it weaves itself right in here pretty nicely. And now I just got to get it up on the mounts like this. Oh, come on, be nice to me. Gasket and our bolts. Always like to have my header bolts facing rearward, just in case you lose a nut. Chances are the bolt is going to still stay in there. I like to have my mounts just finger tight, so when I bolt up my flange, it allows for the exhaust to find its place. Okay, so now I've got this whole exhaust on. She's bolted up nice and tight. This one has my oxygen sensor for my fuel injection. I got that rooted up over the top of the transmission and anchored and plugged in, so it's all ready to go. I've got this flange clean. I got my exhaust over there, and we're just going to go ahead and slip this baby right up in here. Sounds easy, doesn't it? So it's going to come up like this and go there. Okay, so now we've got our whole exhaust on. Give you a walkthrough underneath so you can see what's going on under here. Okay, so let's take a look underneath our truck here. You can see that our exhaust, our headers are all on there. They're painted nicely. We got our TCI transmission in here. That's all buttoned up. all connected and looking great. The remainder of our exhaust is all up here. It's all bolted on and complete. The one thing that you do miss, we are missing, is the drive shaft. But I do have this leaky rear end here that I am going to take apart and seal. That will be for another video shortly after this one. All right, so I got my floor pan that you have seen already, and I had painted it, primed it, painted it, and this is what I got. I'm all fitted up for my emergency brake. This is where my shifter comes through. I've got a piece of Dynamat that I'm going to lay on the top of this and on the side where I did my small patch here, and that will clean this all up, and it will also provide for some sound deadening inside the vehicle. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done, and then we're going to be looking at fitting this inside the truck, getting our emergency brake connected, getting our neutral safety switch connected, and really just kind of moving forward on this project. I mean, basically underneath is all done, up top of the engine's all done. Now it's pretty much just kind of inside, so let's get at it. I got my Dynamat all on here and cut in. I got my emergency brake on here. It looks pretty darn good. I wrapped my Dynamat around this opening so I don't have any sharp edges, and I think it looks darn good. Now, one of the other things I'm going to want to do is, on this inside, we have this edge along here where it seals to the floor. And I have some foam that has an adhesive back, and I am going to make a gasket piece that's going to go all the way around here and seal this off. So I'm going to get at that right now. As I made this gasket that goes all the way around, it's glues on here and it has the holes, so it'll seal this floor pan to the floor in the truck. Now I'm going to go ahead and drop it inside. So here's my floor pan. It's all set in. I put all my bolts in and bolted it down. You can see my emergency brake cables all bolted in. Right over here, hopefully you can see it, is the neutral safety switch. It runs off of 2 wires, and it either creates a contact or breaks a contact. Okay, so let's talk about the neutral safety switch. Okay, basically the neutral safety switch is very, very simple. There's 2 wires that come from the vehicle. They have to be connected to each other for the starter to engage. So what we want is we want the wires to be connected when it's in park, and we want them to be connected when we're in neutral. That allows the vehicle to start. When we're in reverse, we want them to be disconnected. When it's in drive, second or first, we want them also to be disconnected. So a very easy way of doing that is by using a digital multimeter. So if you have a digital multimeter, all you have to do is plug your leads in, set this to ohms. When you have a connection, it goes to 0. When you don't have a connection, it sits at 1. So I use this digital multimeter to tell me when I had continuity, in other words, wires connected. And I adjusted my neutral safety switch so I had continuity when I'm in park, when I'm in neutral, and no continuity when I'm in reverse, drive, first or second. Once I have that all adjusted, I tighten down all my adjustments, my neutral safety switch, and the adjustments on the side of the shifter. I got that all squared away. And then I connect my wires on, retest it again, and then I'm good to go. Okay, so here's my neutral safety switch here. I can screw this in and out, and I can change washers here if I'm not getting enough contact to close up my switch. Over here on the left and on the right, if you can see that these 2 bolts right here, they allow this to rock back and forth and adjust the neutral safety switch. So I got this adjusted so I have continuity at this switch, at these 2 wires, when I'm in neutral and when I'm in park, but I do not have continuity in these wires when I'm in reverse, drive, second, or first. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to set up my shifter. So what I have is I have a knob. I have these various elastics that go on the outside of this knob to provide, you know, kind of a stylish option, I guess you'd call it, for your gear shift lever. So if you want to have a colored one, you can do that. Then you have all of these buttons. You know, this is like a power glide, 2-speed automatic. Here's an overdrive. This is nothing at all. This is a 4-speed, you know, a 3-speed with an overdrive. Mine's just a regular 3-speed, so I selected this button. It snaps right on here. Now, if you look at this, it's got a groove in it right here, and it's got this Allen wrench, this little Allen set screw. So what happens is you drop this in here and you line it up with the Allen screw, and then you turn it, and then it should stop. Yeah, see, now it stops it from coming in or out, and you're like this. I just back it off just a whisker so it's not holding the button. Keep playing with it until you get it like that. There you go. So now it moves nice and easy. Now this is going to go on top of our shifter, and we just had to trim the cable on the top of it. So here is our cable that sticks out that controls our shift dentant. So I'm going to give you kind of a little heads up. If you measure from the top of the stick 3/4 of an inch and then cut this cable, you'll be right where you want to be. Once you have this cut, then you just take your shift knob, you put it on here, and you turn it, and you'll notice that now I have the ability to shift the gears. So let me get this thing kind of lined up to where I want it to be, and boom. Now what happens is when I push on this button, it pushes on this piece down the bottom and releases the gear. So if I push again, now I'm in reverse. Again, now I'm in neutral. Again, now I'm in drive, second, drive. You can pull it in and out of drive and second without pushing the button. But like as you go through, you're going to have to kind of wiggle it, and then you've got your dentant. So now you're stuck in park like you should be. Push the button, that gets you into reverse. Now, you push the button again, give it a little bit of a wiggle, and now you're in neutral. It's kind of stuck right there. Push the button again, boom, you're in drive. Now if you want to downshift, quick downshift to second, upshift to drive, and then once again, just like your regular car, you're in neutral, you're in reverse, push it again, you're in park, and you're locked in. So that's it. We're all set with our shifter now. We're all set with our emergency brake. We're all set with our neutral safety switch. So everything's good. All we got to do is get a carpet in here. Okay, folks, so everything on our project truck for our transmission is pretty much all set. We're all connected. Everything looks great. Our shifter's all dialed in. Our neutral safety switch is all dialed in. So the only thing that's really left is to put some fluid in it and get it started up and get the fluid work through the transmission, get it topped off. Then we'll be ready to set the kickdown and do a road test. So let's get at it. Okay, so let's talk about some transmission fluid. TCI transmission, TCI converter, TCI cooler. Okay, what do you think I'm running for transmission fluid? I'm using TCI Max Shift. Okay, it's what TCI recommends. It's a good fluid, and that's what I'm using. So I'm going to top this off with about 4 quarts. Remember, we got 1 in the converter already, so that'll be 5. Usually these take about 9 quarts, but you need to fill it, run it a little bit, and then run it through the gears to get it all circulated and keep going until you top it off. So that's what we're working on now. Okay, folks, so it's another day. Yesterday I finished off by getting the transmission fluid in it and fired the truck up. I ended up with a total of 7 quarts of transmission fluid in this system. So there was 1 in the converter. I put 4 in, and then I ended up putting another 2 in to get it to the full line, let it warm up, shut it down. Then I went underneath and I tightened all my bolts. Specifically, I wanted to tighten my header bolts to the head and my header gasket flanges after it heated up. And I needed our headers that we had painted with the VHT coating to heat up, to dry, and then cool off. So there was a little bit of paint vapor, I should say, that burnt off of those headers. So I let it cool down. I tightened all my bolts underneath. I don't have any leaks. Everything's great. So as far as I'm concerned, we're pretty much good to go. We just have one more thing I want to do, and that is to set the kickdown linkage, and we're going to get at that right now. Okay, So here is our kickdown linkage here, and right now I've got our throttle at wide open. I got a holder in there holding my throttle wide open. I want to take my cable that because this system's using a cable, and I'm going to want to pull that so the kickdown is completely extended. All right. Then I'm going to adjust it by taking. Let me get a little bit closer. By right here, there's a little barrel clamp that clamps the cable. So I pull my cable through this, get it to where I want it to be, and then tighten it, and then I release my throttle and check it. So what I did, so I already did all that, and then what I did was I got my throttle wide open, and I went underneath to make sure that my kickdown is fully extended and it has the proper amount of pressure on it. I will show you what it looks like underneath. Okay, so this is my kickdown lever here, and here is my cable. Now my throttle is full on the floor, so this should be pulled all the way, which in fact right now it is. When I release my throttle, this will come back. When I depress my throttle to the full throttle position, it will pull on this and pull to this position, and it will cause the transmission to drop a gear. Generally speaking, from third to second. It's what we used to call in the old days a passing gear. So you pull out to pass somebody, it kicks down, you pass, you take your foot off the gas, it shifts back into high gear. So we are all set here. So here's my throttle setup with my throttle back in a neutral position. Now you can see this is my shift cable here. When I apply the throttle, it comes up against that and it pulls it into passing gear. Okay, so now with our kickdown all adjusted, everything's been double checked, our fluid is topped off, we're good to, drive this thing out, fire it up, get it warmed up, drive it out of the shop, and take it for a road test. So that's what we'll be working on next. Well, alright folks, that concludes. Now you can check out some of my other videos that I use this truck on. I'll put a link up here. I've done a Holly sniper system on this truck. There's all kinds of videos of it. There's all kinds of videos of how to do all kinds of automotive things, including auto body and painting. So please like and subscribe and support the channel. If you need to purchase anything, there's links for almost everything that I used below. Please use my links. It helps me out. And thank you for tuning in, and good luck on your project.